Hello, aspiring developers. I am excited to welcome you to the Introduction to Web Development workshop. My name is Georges Roberto, and I'm thrilled to be your instructor on this fascinating adventure where we're going to learn about web development. I'm not alone in assisting you through this workshop. Instructor Daniel Kalutu will join me, and together we'll make sure we deliver an experiencing, exciting, and entertaining learning experience. So why should you pursue web development? Before we go into the technical aspects, let's take a look at the why of web development. Web development is such an interesting field in today's age. Uh, it is a digital era, and web is an effective platform for communication, for business, for creativity, even for learning. And it not only provides us with the valuable abilities, but it also opens doors to several jobs in this computing world. So the workshop overview, over the next 4 days, we'll be learning the fundamentals of web development with a focus on tools that every developer needs. We will begin by introducing you to Visual Studio Code, shortly known as VS Code, which is an IDE or an integrated development environment. Also, we will learn about GitHub, which is a version control system helpful for storage of your projects and collaborative programming. In addition, we'll also learn about Git, and that marks the overview of what we learn in the first 4 days. In the beginning of the next week, we learn about front-end web development, and that is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Instructor Kalutu, as earlier mentioned, will be taking you through the course. So straight away, let's save on time and begin on installation of Visual Studio Code. Okay, now that you have the overview of the web workshop, you already know the tools that we mentioned earlier. You already know the key concepts, which is the HTML, CSS, and the JavaScript. You already know the development workflow. There we talked about Visual Studio Code as the editor, Git as the version control, and GitHub for deployment and collaborative coding. And now your expected outcome after course completion. All the aspiring developers who maintain discipline throughout this session expect results like foundational understanding in the core front-end web development concepts. You're going to gain practical skills, that is hands-on experience with tools like VS Code, Git, and GitHub. You're going to be collaborative ready in case in short, you're going to have the ability to do collaborative coding on projects using version control with the platform GitHub, as we earlier mentioned. You're also going to be able to initiate, to plan, to develop, and successfully execute your own project in the completion of this workshop. So straight away, I'm going to start on tools used for web development. Visual Studio Code is the first tool. I picked it because it's open source. So as I said, I picked Visual Studio Code to be our main integrated development environment, or in short, IDE. From that environment, it's a place where you're going to write your codes that are going to be served by a web browser, and in the long run, it will create whatever we call a website. So why Visual Studio Code? I picked it because it's open source, to mean it's free. Then it's developed by Microsoft. Also, it's lightweight, so it's easily installable. It doesn't take too much RAM. It's easy to customize, and it is rich in features like syntax highlighting, debugging of codes. It has several extensions for several languages. That's why we picked Visual Studio Code to be our default IDE. So how to install Visual Studio Code? I hope you can now see my screen. you directly go to your browser and just type Visual Studio Code. From there, you're going to find this download link. Just click on it, and now it brings us to the Visual Studio Code download page, where you can download depending on your OS. By OS I mean Windows, Linux, Mac, as highlighted here by Visual Studio Code. For me, I'm using Windows, as you can see down here, so I'm going to pick Windows as my OS. And immediately you click on Windows, you realize that it starts downloading Visual Studio Code for you. It's about 90 MB, yeah, 90.4. And as it downloads, it opens the Visual Studio documentation page. Here you can learn anything you need to know about Visual Studio Code, from the overview, the setup, getting started, to the user guide, to the source control, terminals, languages, etc. So for now, we are going to do the Visual Studio Code setup overview using Windows. In case you're using Linux or Mac OS, please feel free to follow the Visual Studio Code documentation. And in case you experience any challenge, also feel free to reach out to any of the instructors, and you'll get help on how to install Visual Studio Code on any OS that you're using. So for those using Windows, immediately as we wait for this to download, it should be ready in the next like 10 seconds. So once again, I'll recap on what we've just said. Visual Studio Code is an IDE. An IDE is an environment where your project lives or is developed, or where you type your codes and stuff like that. Now that it's completed installation of Visual Studio Code, you directly go to your downloads. Depending on where you download your projects, you just double tap on it, or still you can right click and pick the open option. So for now, we've just double clicked, and as it loads, yeah, when you right click and click on open, it does the same thing, still opens the Visual Studio Code. This is called the Visual Studio Code setup wizard. So here you'll first get the installation agreement, license agreement by Microsoft. As well as said, it's Microsoft, it's developed by Microsoft. So you need to read through these agreements. Earlier, when I installed VS Code, I read through them, so you can also read through them and get to know what you are accepting as the agreement of Visual Studio Code. So once you accept it, you can just click on next. Then here, this will choose the installation path. You can always leave it as default and click on next. Also, I forgot to mention here, you will see that you need at least 355 MB of free disk space for you to install VS Code. So the path that you choose up here, make sure you have at least 500 MB of space. Then you can just click next. If you don't want a start menu folder, you can check on this, but it's recommended that you leave it. Then here I'll also recommend that you check on all these checkboxes, so it can create a desktop icon for you. It can add the open with code action both to the Windows Explorer context menu and directory context menu. Then registering code as an editor for supported file types. So if in case you want to open maybe a file developed by a language, then that's a supported file type, and you'll get the register code as an option, as an editor option. Then add to path. This is extremely important because this is configuring VS Code to your machine so that you can access it from almost anywhere. So make sure add to path is checked. Then you click on next, and this is just to confirm what you've been choosing. We've chosen the destination location, we've chosen the menu folder, we've also added the additional icons, the path, the open with code option, and we've registered it as an editor for supported types. So if all that is correct, click on install. If at all something is still an issue, you can click on back and you go and complete the installation. So now once you click on install, you can see that setup is preparing to install Visual Studio Code on your computer. You give it a short time. In about a minute, it should have completed installing VS Code. And as it continues with the installation process, you can still go through this documentation page. Always you can find enough information. Anything you need to know about Visual Studio Code, feel free to reach out and we'll give you immediate feedback. You can also come and learn more about Visual Studio Code from the documentation, because documentation has everything you need to know about an application or a website or anything that you want to know. Okay, now that we have the web overview, we also have our VS Code installed. We'll just go straight to GitHub. So if you do not have an account, a GitHub account, you can follow through. Just go to your browser and type there GitHub. The first link you see here, it's telling us about GitHub. As we said, this is just a place where you can store your projects. You can see it's just a hosting platform, and for version control and collaboration, it is free of charge. And yeah, it's not only for coding, you can also do projects, you can do teamwork, collaborations, as we said earlier. So now how do we install GitHub? We just come direct to the join GitHub page. Here you fill in these details. So once you fill in those details, you fill in your email address. Mine may not work just because you already have a GitHub account, so it will say email is already taken. Yeah, email is already taken. So but there you just come, then you fill in your password. Make sure it's a very strong password. And then whether you want the occasional updates, you can just check this box. If not, you can leave it blank. For me, I'll leave it blank. Then here you verify your account. You fill in this captcha reCAPTCHA, and once it's successful, then you have the create account button being enabled. So when you click on create button, then you will be able to create your GitHub account, and immediately you create your GitHub account, it will lead to a login page. So let me show you. Yeah, so immediately you click on github.com. After logging in, you can see that the account you created is right here. There you have your profile, your status. You can add an account, you can add your repositories. Repositories are the projects that you save there, the folders that contain maybe your coding files. Then projects, if you have larger projects, you can save your repositories as projects. And projects is basically used when especially used in collaborating. Then you have for now we are not creating a project. We have we have packages. Here there are several GitHub packages. There is Docker. This is for containerization of your projects. We have the Apache Maven, we have the Nugget, we have the Ruby Gems, the NPM package, we have the containers. So as time goes by, we'll familiarize ourselves with a few of these packages. Then stars is just about the normal starting of projects that you have studied here. So if you like a project, you can just start it, and it will be counted among the GitHub stars. Like here you can see Kaluto has a cache showcase, and once it's started, it's developed in TypeScript. And once it's started now, it can be counted amongst your stars. So if you develop interest in any project, you can just start it, so you can always find it there later when you look at it. So whatever the project. Yeah, so that's the overview of GitHub, but we learn more about GitHub. Make sure you create a README so that immediately you log into your website, into your GitHub account, you can always, the README is the first thing that you see. So we can always edit it. This is a markdown file, that's why it's saved as readme.md. Markdowns normally majorly are used for documentation of projects. So here you can say that like, hi at Janza Programmers, I'm interested in software engineering. I'm looking to collaborate on serious projects. If you want to reach me, you can say, you can just say here, reach me via email, and then you can leave your email account there. You learn about most of these tags. Pronoun is they, and you can leave there. Fun fact, you can add any more things you want, because here you see this is commented code, and it is used to explain more about whatever we've written. So there you can see that Janja Programmers/Janja Programmers is a special repository because it's readme.md. This file appears on a GitHub profile, and you can click the preview link to take a look at your changes. So like here we change this reach me via email. When you click on preview, you can see that here it's changed to reach me via email. So if you're comfortable enough with that, you can just click on commit changes. You are going to learn more about those. Then you can click on commit changes once again. So it reloads, and you can see that there is this one, there's this status here saying now, and if you click on history, it will show you that you created this readme file 15 hours ago, you updated it 5 hours ago, and you committed now. So these are the status codes for the commit details. You can copy them, you can share them, and you can copy them as code also. Then yeah, so immediately you just click on github.com and then /Janja Programmers. Then it loads that default readme file. But when you just click on github.com, once you are logged in, it just opens the GitHub homepage. So here you can now create a repository as we talked about, but that one we're going to learn about after we've successfully created a GitHub account, which I'm hoping by now you have. If you haven't, or if you're experiencing any problems creating a GitHub account, please feel free to reach out and you'll get help on the same. Use our social platforms, use our WhatsApp group link. You can just type in the comment section. Okay, now that you already have GitHub installed, now that you already have VS Code installed as your code editor, and you already have a GitHub account, now the next thing we're going to do, as we said, tools for development, we're speaking about VS Code, GitHub, and Git. So you may be having the question, what is the difference between Git and GitHub? First of all, Git is a version control system which allows developers to track changes in their code. The full name of Git stands for the Global Information Tracker. Yeah, Global Information Tracker. And from that, we can see that developers use it to track changes in their code. While GitHub, it is web-based, and it is just a hosting service. And as we said, we gave the analogy of a bank where you put your money for safe storage. So GitHub is a hosting service where you put your Git repositories. So first understand that Git is a version control system that developers use to track changes in their code, and these codes are stored in repositories. These repositories are hosted on GitHub. So it is essential to have Git for you to do the version controlling and tracking of code. And if you're using Git, then you need to have a GitHub account where those repositories are going to be stored. So now that you know what Git is, you may also have a question: if is Git free? Yeah, it is. It is an open source. In programming, we say that something that is open source is out there for other developers, or the, let's say, the general public to use for freely without having to pay or something like that. So Git is also open source, a tool used for code management, just as we've explained in the previous minute. So now, how do you install Git? So just come to your web browser and type the word Git. It is provided by the GNU. I believe it should be somewhere here. It's provided by the GNU. Okay, then you click on Git itself. Since it's open source, it's also cross-platform. You can have Git on your Windows, you can have Git on your Mac, you can also have Git on your Linux. It was even powered by Linux, and it was coded by C. So it's a very strong application. So next, you just come here to downloads, and in Git also there is a documentation. I always advise, if there is anything you want to know about anything, if you want to know about Visual Studio Code, there is always documentation about Visual Studio Code. If you want to know more about GitHub, there is documentation about GitHub. If you want to know anything about Git, then you have documentation for Git at your disposal, which is also free. So here we have videos like what is version control, what is Git, get going with Git, quick wins with Git, and you can see that most of them are below 10 minutes, and there are more videos here on Git. There is a book here called the entire Pro Git book. Then there is reference manual. So anything you need to know about Git will always be there for you at your disposal. But for now, what we want to do is download. We want to download Git to our machine. So for me, I'm using Windows, and I'll show you how to do it using Windows. So just tap on the Windows. Then I advise that you click here to download. This first link here, click here to download. Use this link for downloading GitHub, because that one will download the latest version and it will choose the bit for your specific machine. So just tap on click here to download, and you'll notice that it will prompt you on where you want to download it. So if it's in the right folder, for me I want it in downloads, just click on save. It's a very small application, around 50 MB. Yeah, it's 58.0, so it should be done in less than a minute. And those who are using Linux, I'd advise that you tap on this lower link. Just a moment. Immediately you search Git. Those using Linux, you can come and tap here on downloads. Directly go to downloads on the Git page. Then just come to Linux, and it will give you this commands that you type for you to get Git installed in your machine, depending on which Linux version you're using. For those who are using Mac, the procedure is just the same. You go to downloads, then you click on Mac OS, and you follow the prompts to download and install Git for Mac OS. So our download is complete. We're just going to open the folder where we downloaded it. Then we can either right click and tap on open, or you can just double tap and it will open it. So this is setting up using the it's called the setup wizard application. The Git setup wizard. You just need to agree to the terms and conditions, then you click on next. So when you click on next, make sure that you check the box of the additional icons on the desktop. Also check open git bash here. Then also make sure you've checked associate.git .git configuration files with the default text editor. You can check the new to add git bash to profile terminal. Check the Scala. You can also check the associates.sh files to be run with bash. So once all that is checked, you can click on next. Then it will ask you the default editor that you are supposed to use with Git. I advise that you choose use Visual Studio Code as Git's default editor. So the first, hopefully it will be the first option for you. Click on next. Then for adjusting the names of initial branches, just let Git decide. You should also adjust path using the recommended Git from the command line and also from third-party software. So click on next. Then you should use the OpenSSL library. It's better to native Windows secure channel, so click on use the OpenSSL and click on next. Then you should also check out the Windows style if you're using Windows and commit Unix style with line endings. So then you click on next. Use MNTTY or the default MSYS2. Then click on next. For Git pull behavior, you should choose on fast forward or merge. Then click on next. Then for the credential helper, choose the Git credential manager and click on next. You should enable file system caching to configure extra options. Then click on next. Also, for configuring experimental options, I'd advise that you leave both unchecked, and then you click on install. So there, if you had Git previously installed, it will first uninstall that old Git version that you're having, then it will now reinstall the newest Git version that is provided. So currently it's extracting the files it is creating its own folder. Like for me, it creates a program files Git. In C program files, it creates a Git folder where everything Git related is being put there. So it does that by default because we clicked on the recommended path settings. So it should be done in about a minute or less than a minute. Then it will install and configure Git. It will also configure the setup option. So once it's complete, I advise that you check the launch Git bash icon. You can uncheck the view release notes. Then you click on finish. So when you click on finish, it fires up the Git bash terminal. And for you to confirm if you have Git successfully installed, I hope you can still see my screen. You just tap on Git --version, then you type on enter. There you're going to see, like for me, I installed Git version 2.4.3 and I'm 0 and I'm on Windows 0.1. So if you get this message, then you have Git successfully installed and configured, and and the path of Git is also configured. So that's it about Git. Now we know about Visual Studio Code, which is a code editor, and we know that code editor is the environment where we run our codes or where we write our codes. Then we know of GitHub. We know of Git. Git is a version control system. It is a repository where we write our codes. So you can have a project in a Git repository, and inside that repository you can save your projects. And where are these project repositories hosted? There is where GitHub comes in, and it is a web-based platform where we can host all our Git repositories. Git repositories are hosted in GitHub, and they are written in Visual Studio Code as the code editor. So that's basically the overview of the tools that we are going to use for development, which is Visual Studio Code, Git, and GitHub. If you have not managed to create a GitHub account yet, please, this is the time, because we can't move forward if you do not have a GitHub account. If you haven't managed to install Git, also please feel free to reach out to any of the instructors. You can also write it in the comment section in YouTube. You can also send direct messages to the instructors, and they'll guide you on how to install or set up Git, Visual Studio Code, or even help you with account creation of GitHub. To this point, I'm happy to say that you have reached the completion of day 1, and the success in installations of Visual Studio Code, Git, and account creation of GitHub is the first step to being a good developer, a developer who can work on their own, a developer who can work collaboratively. And so from now you should be ready enough take the remaining time to make sure that you familiarize yourself with Visual Studio Code, you familiarize yourself with GitHub. For Git, we are going to learn more about it. You can just be ready for it for the next lesson. To this point, I wish to thank you for your time. Thank you for reaching to this point of this video. Also, thank you for committing to this point. So that is introduction. That's it for introduction, and we look forward to having you in our consecutive classes. Also, we wish the best for you and a happy coding